Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to actually talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're specifically going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, the 1980 Saturday morning cartoon, Season 1, Episode 5, In Search of the Dungeon Master. All right, so this is a very unusual episode. In this episode, the main characters, so you have Eric the Cavalier, Hank the Ranger, Diana the Acrobat, Sheila the Thief, Bobby the Barbarian, and Presto the Magician, and of course Uni, right? So they actually have to rescue the Dungeon Master from a very dangerous, evil, non-player character, and that is Warduke. So there's a lot here. So what was Gary Gygax trying to tell us with this episode of the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon? Well, the biggest takeaway from this is Warduke. So what is Warduke? Well, he's a lot. So one, he is a non-player character, right? So he is a character that's going to be in a Dungeons and Dragons story. He would be controlled by the Dungeon Master. Now, of course, it does get very meta because Dungeon Master is a character within the show, and in this case, the player characters are rescuing Dungeon Master from Warduke. So let's talk about Warduke for a minute. So we never see Warduke's face. He is a fighter, and he is an evil fighter, okay? And he traps Dungeon Master in a big crystal, a crystal that's even larger than Dungeon Master himself. By the way, Dungeon Master is a little, I think he's smaller than a halfling. I think he's about gnome size, right? But there's no real indications that Dungeon Master is a gnome. I think Dungeon Master is very clearly like Yoda. Like, you don't really know his race or his species. And he might be, like, one of a kind. Is very, Yoda, I do know about Yaddle, but I think Yoda's pretty much one of a kind. I guess we have, Grogu now? Like, Baby Yoda from Mandalorian. So, yeah, but you know what I mean. Like, so where there's very, very little information about the race, right? And so basically, Dungeon Master is captured by Warduke. So let's talk about Warduke. Warduke is definitely the rock star of this episode. So Warduke is a evil fighter, right? Now, I think he is shown to be neutral evil, okay? He also is an independent agent, and he's powerful, right? So we're seeing a whole lot here from Dungeons & Dragons. One, that a very, very powerful, that your player characters are going to come across incredibly powerful non-player characters. And these people can be incredibly dangerous. So Warduke is definitely fighter class, right? And he has like half he wears like half plate mail, right? And then the other half, he's got a loincloth and like nothing, right? It's just kind of it's definitely a weird look. But he also has a helmet that has bat ears on it. And and also we don't really see his face, and he has glowing red eyes, right? But there's a lot of indicators that he is human, and that the glowing red eyes is coming from his helm. The other thing that we're seeing is high-level Dungeons and Dragons characters have magic items, right? And that's how Warduke manages to capture Dungeon Master, right? So I think Warduke is the standout here, and it's just saying in Dungeons and Dragons, the player characters are going to come across a lot of different player characters. Some of them are going to be standouts, and Warduke has very much become a standout. So Warduke on the card today, his action figure run you about $150, maybe even better if it's in better condition, right? And Warduke has been quite famous and is probably one of the best known non-player characters from the television show, and we will be seeing Warduke in the upcoming the Wild Beyond the Witchlight, the upcoming adventure book for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. That is very exciting. I am super excited about that, and really just very that's good. I'm really thrilled to see that. And so that's going to be exciting. And so we're still seeing Warduke as a part of Dungeons & Dragons today. Also, just to be clear, the moment Warduke shows up in Wild Beyond the Witchlight, that is an invitation to bring the rest of those player characters into your Dungeons and Dragons world, right? We're hoping that they'll show some of the Eric. That essentially makes Eric the Cavalier and Bobby the Barbarian and Hank the Ranger and Sheila the Thief and Diana the Acrobat and Presto the Magician and Uni, that makes them canon, right? And this is one of the biggest issues, right? Like, you can't say Warduke is canon and then say, Eric the Cavalier is not. They're from the same world. If one came through, the other can come through using the same methods or slightly different methods, right? So it's kind of, you don't. So Wizards of the Coast is trying to play games with canon, but you really can't do that. I think the other thing that's really interesting about this is the name of the show, In Search of the Dungeon Master, right? So this is, in my opinion, a coded clue from Gary Gygax that Dungeons & Dragons, and that the Dungeon Master role in Dungeons & Dragons is more than it appears at the face, right? And that we need to be in search of the Dungeon Master. And I am convinced the Dungeon Master has not truly arrived, right? So essentially, by creating the DMG, the PHB, and the Monster Manual, starting that journey in 1974, and within a few short years we have all three of those books. Gary Gygax has created the Dungeon Master, and I am very convinced that 47 years later we are still in search of the Dungeon Master. We really don't know what the Dungeon Master role is capable of, what it was built for, why it exists, what its end goal is, what it's supposed to mean for humanity. A lot of these things. We really just don't understand how large that role is. So even though we're 47 years out, we're still in search of the Dungeon Master. And that's a big part of my life, is just getting to fully understand, fully flesh out, fully help to manifest Dungeons & Dragons out of we're hatching it. It's in its egg now. It's not even born. It's really very much still in inception. So 5 out of 5 stars for Season 1, Episode 5, In Search of the Dungeon Masters. And of course, the player characters are able to successfully stop Warduke from selling the Dungeon Master to Venger, right? And they're able to rescue him. And then, a Dungeon Master can go back to riddling them and kind of leading them along on this journey. And I have been continuing to watch. I'm watching through the entire series, and I'm like, if you watch the series end to end on Twitch, it's 10.5 hours long, and I'm through, I think, 8.5 hours of it. And one of the things is I'm starting to see why Dungeon Master brought the player characters into the world. There's entire cities that they save, and there are people's lives that are clearly saved because the player characters are in, Faerun, are in the D&D world. And that's really critical. It's really important that they end up there and that they are able to save people, and their being there does have a very clear purpose, which is important because Dungeon Master has them there, and you're like, why are they here? So it's really important. The last thing I want to say about this episode is I've also been thinking, and just so you're aware, the Dungeons & Dragons 1980 cartoon does not have an official ending. It just petered out. It never ended. And I was just thinking, I actually think that might have been on purpose. And the reason why is most campaigns don't end on the note they're supposed to. The vast majority of Dungeons & Dragons campaigns peter out, right? They don't actually have an official ending. And the reason why is most campaigns don't end because the story's finished. They end because holding 5 people in place, 1 as a Dungeon Master, 4 as dungeon players, is virtually impossible, right? Over an extended amount of time. Even over a short period of time, people's lives change, right? And there's just a lot of motion, right? So most campaigns don't end, and the Dungeons & Dragons 1980s cartoon show does not have an official ending. And I think that there's a real, very distinct reason for that, and that is to model and tell us you are going to go into a lot of campaigns, and the vast majority of them will not have the classic ending that you thought it would. But the journey is worth it alone. It's literally not about the destination. It is quite literally about the journey, right? And so, when we see Gary Gygax start his cartoon campaign, D&D 1E, right? 1980s American Saturday morning cartoon as the as the milieu, it doesn't end. And I think that's just beautiful that it mirrors the vast majority of campaigns. All that's my opinion. Have you seen this episode? What are your thoughts? What do you think do you think Dungeon Master is a gnome, or do you think he's something else? I'd love to hear your thoughts and know what you think about this. Please let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.